Hello. Yes. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone.
You.
Hi. We're seeing lots of people. We have about 95 people with us.
Hello.
I would like to ask some to all mute themselves. And those appearing as Katrina Borromeo, you may please rename yourselves. We had some technical issues. I'm really sorry about that. But let's start and have a really good discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about measuring the invisible work. What is that actually? So again, I welcome you to this first webinar. This is the first edition of the series of dialogues as part of the 2021 State of the World's Volunteerism Report, which is going to be about volunteerism and the social contract, the new social contract. So we're going to try to answer the question like, what is the role of volunteering in the formation of the new social contract? Sorry, I'm just going to mute everyone. And look at the relationship, how this relationship between people and states are evolving. But to answer that question, we will be doing research with a university consortium. At the same time, we will be updating the numbers on who are the volunteers, how many are they, what do they do, where are they from, and how did COVID, this pandemic, actually impacted the types and forms and ways people volunteer. So in this session, actually, we're just going to be focusing more on measuring the scale and the scope of volunteering. So more on the who are they, what they do, where are they from, how many men, women, volunteers are there, and the types and approaches to measure this volunteer work. So we are joined by highly distinguished statisticians from the National Statistics Office of Italy, Ms. Tania Cappadozzi, the Chief Labor Statistician from Stats South Africa, Ms. Maloreto Mosiane. And to help us bring this together and look at the wider government perspective, we are joined by the Presidential Volunteering Commissioner of Cyprus, Mr. Giannis Sigianaki, and of course, our in-house statistician from the International Labor Organization, Mr. Vladimir Ganta. To start off, Vlad will be actually doing the first presentation. So I'm gonna give you the sharing permission for your presentation. And to start off, Vlad, you've done a lot of research looking at how different countries from the north and from the south have measured volunteer work in the past decade. So can you tell us what tools are they using and what tools are available out there and what are they used for? What are the pros and cons, and what are some of the good practices, just to set the scene? So over to you, Vlad.
Okay. Thank you, Katrina. Actually, this is the first time when I see so many Katrinas in a Zoom chat, in a Zoom meeting. How do you do it? Yes. I'd like to be able to do this in other meetings.
Yes, okay. I shared my unique link with everyone, so it was my fault.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, next time, be careful.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, as you say, there are different approaches countries use to measure. And in our joint work since 2017, we have found many interesting about how countries measure volunteer work, and we have identified some specific data sources used most frequently to measure. So in my presentation, I would like to speak about this and many other interesting things. But first I want to share my screen. Oh, I don't have the permission yet.
Let me give that to you right now. Actually, I can't tell. It's Marguerite who. Okay, let me. I'm sorry, Marguerite. Do you mind sharing the screen of Vlad? Giving Vlad a host permission, please. Or I will just, this is going to be. So while we're waiting for the presentation, I think we could start first. I'm sure you have everything in your head, Vlad. So actually you have now the sharing permissions.
Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. Without my notes, right?
We can't see your notes.
Okay, that's cool because I have my notes on another screen. No, that's right. Okay. Okay, first of all, thank you for joining this meeting. I think this is the second time when I speak to so many people about statistics. Last time was during a conference in 2018. So in the next 10, 15 minutes, I will try to introduce you to the exciting world of statistics, methodologies, and data production. So things that we will learn today you will hear from me today and my colleagues from Italy and South Africa in this webinar may seem to you complex, maybe even boring, but you should consider yourself privileged because not many people know the things that you will hear during this webinar. And I will try to do my best to keep you awake. And let's start with the things that we statisticians like most, so definitions. So what is definition? What is volunteer work? It's important to define it so we speak about the same thing. We need a clear definition in order to be able to measure it in similar ways in different parts of the world. Such a definition was established by the 19th International Conference of Labor Statisticians in 2013. This conference is organized by the ILO every 5 years to address the most important issues related to statistics of work. This 19th ICLS was very special because it updated the existing international standards and made volunteering one of its major components. According to the current definition, an activity should correspond to 4 criteria in order to be classified as volunteer work. First, it must be work. That is an activity resulting in goods produced and services provided by humans. Well, the reference to humans is important because what robots does today is not considered work, at least yet. So then work should not be remunerated. Volunteers should not receive remuneration for the time worked or for the products they or services provide. Nevertheless, the person could receive support to be able to participate in the activity. For example, bus, train, plane tickets to get to the place where the work will be done and return home. Then meals, accommodation if necessary, medicaments, special clothes or tools, etc. Cash could be also offered to pay for all this, but there is a limitation. The amount of cash received by a volunteer should not exceed 1/3 of the local wages. So, which means if a volunteer receives something, an amount which is higher than 1/3 of the, let's say, average salary, average wage on the local market, then that work, according to the definition set by statisticians, will not be considered as volunteer work because it will not be considered unpaid. And of course, engagement in volunteer work should be voluntary. It should be a choice. So people should not involve in this type of work under menace or coercion. So this should be a free choice. And finally, the beneficiaries of the products and services must be organizations, communities, persons who are not members of the volunteers family or the environment. Of course, it's difficult to completely exclude volunteers and their families from the beneficiaries when talking about communities and environment. But the key point here is that the primary intention is of a volunteer is to help a group or the society or a specific person who is not related to the volunteer. Care for own family is another form of unpaid work, different from volunteering, and is called own use production work. And it's important to make this distinction between unpaid work for own family and for other families, the community, or the society as a whole. Following this definition, some types of unpaid work performed for others are excluded from volunteer work. For example, corporate or company volunteering performed usually by employees during paid time granted by employers. Such volunteering schemes are very popular in some countries. However, such work cannot be classified as volunteer work because the receipt of income is an essential condition in such schemes and a motivating factor. And our statistical definition does not classify this type of work as unpaid. So it's because the time while the work is done is paid, it's considered as a remuneration and it cannot be considered as volunteering. Although it's a voluntary activity in which people engage voluntarily, but it breaks one of the main rules of the definition. Then volunteering required by education or training programs is also excluded because it is required, that is, it's not a free choice, it's an obligation. There's a commitment to do some of this type of work, and refusal to engage in such work is most probably penalized by institutions. Like you cannot finish, you cannot graduate a specific education program if you don't do some specific work and prove that you have learned to do something. So again, this type of work breaks the condition of because it's not a free choice. You have to do it because there's a penalty for not doing this. Then unpaid work ordered by courts or law is excluded for the same reason. It's clear. And some civic participation activities like voting, protesting, or boycotting are also excluded because they do not result in products and services that can be consumed by someone else. And that activity is important because those who want to participate in those activities are there. So it cannot be delegated. You cannot pay for someone to do it on your behalf. These are voluntary activities, but this is not work. Still, there are some reasons to challenge this point of view. For example, people who vote in election in countries where this is not an obligation actually make possible the establishment of institutions crucial for the normal functioning of societies, like parliaments, for example. Some people vote, but all people benefit from this effort of going and voting. So could this be considered as a service provided to the society, similar to how people protect the environment, which is considered a service to society? Well, answering this question is challenging, but I'm trying as a statistician in the ILO Statistics Department working on this topic. It's not that easy. Many other statisticians from other areas are involved in these discussions, and it probably takes some more time to clarify all those things. Okay, now, who are the volunteers then? Well, again, after defining volunteer work, the 19 ICLS set the criteria to identify volunteers. There are only two requirements. To be counted as a volunteer, a person must do volunteer work for at least 1 hour during 4 weeks or 1 month. There are no limitations in relation to the type of work, tasks performed, place where the work is performed, or the way in which people engage in this type of work. Also, there are no restrictions related to the characteristics of the person, like age, sex, education, etc. You may want to know why this condition of at least 1 hour during 4 weeks or 1 month. First, to harmonize volunteer work statistics with employment statistics, which are more developed at this stage. And second, to facilitate the recall of events during survey interviews. Because longer the reference period, harder for interviewers to answer questions, because they have difficulties in recalling accurately what they did. A distinction is made based on how people engage in volunteer work. If through some sorts of organizations, community interests, or self-aid groups, then such work is labeled organization-based volunteer work. If independently, without intermediaries, let's say, then it's called direct volunteer work. Most of you probably have never heard about these two types of work, and you are used to speak about formal and informal volunteering. Well, the terms defined by ILO and those used by most of you, I mean formal, informal volunteering, they overlap, but still there are some specific but important differences. And I won't speak here about this, it's a longer discussion. Now that you know about the latest international statistical definitions related to volunteer work, I will try to explain you briefly how the ILO recommends to measure volunteer work applying these definitions. Well, in June last year, the ILO released the latest guidance on the measurement of volunteer work. The core of it is a survey module, it's a short questionnaire designed to be attached to labor force surveys. These are household surveys used to collect regularly data on paid and unpaid work. In addition, the ILO published several technical guides to support the implementation of this survey module to measure volunteering in different cultural, economical contexts. The new survey module was developed jointly by UNV and ILO to support the implementation of the international standards across the world, and especially to boost the measurement efforts in the global south, where very few countries produce volunteer work statistics. And if they somehow collect some data on volunteering, they don't do it in accordance with the latest international standards. And because of this, such data is very difficult to analyze and compare with data from other countries, mostly from the global north, or the measurement of volunteer work is at a more advanced stage. With significant support from UNV, between 2018 and 2020, the ILO Statistics Department conducted a detailed analysis of national practices and qualitative and quantitative tests in 2 countries, Ukraine and Senegal. This allowed us to develop survey tools that can capture people's participation in all sorts of voluntary activities, whether formal or informal, including those referred as traditional volunteering, widely spread in developing countries and rarely considered by those who practice those activities as volunteering. The ILO module introduces one important innovation. It's the measurement of volunteer work done in relation to non-financial donations. it allows capturing the unpaid work of those people who choose to donate different types of goods. People may spend time to collect, buy those goods or products. They may process, prepare, arrange, pack, sort, do all different types of work to prepare them to be donated. And finally, they can even deliver them personally. These are services provided at zero cost to the recipients of donations and are considered as volunteer work because it's unpaid work, which corresponds to the criteria I mentioned earlier. Usually many such people don't think that what they do is volunteering. If they are not asked special questions, the number of volunteers may be significantly underestimated. Data collecting using the ILO module can be used to measure the time, to estimate the number of volunteers disaggregated by different personal characteristics, and the number of hours worked by them. And these indicators can be then used to be disaggregated by many different social and demographic characteristics, and by characteristics of the work, like type of tasks performed, the beneficiaries of this work, type of organizations mobilizing volunteers, and many others. And in combination with statistics on wages, this data can be used to estimate the economic value of the volunteer work. And for these reasons I've just mentioned, and for many other reasons, this module and measurement guidance is the preferred choice of the toolbox. And this is the main recommendation of the toolbox, if possible, to use labor for service or other large-scale household surveys and attach this module and follow the measurement guidance to measure volunteer work according to international standards. What is important to mention is that this new guidance and this module update the measurement guidance provided previously in the ILO manual on the measurement of volunteer work. At the time when it was published in 2011, it was the key resource on the topic. It was the result of a great work done by UNV, ILO, and several national statistical offices from around the world. Since then, however, based on the accumulated country practice, it became clear that this guidance needs to be updated to reflect the changes in the international standards and to be able to better capture specific forms of volunteering, especially traditional volunteering, in which many people engage in developing countries.
Thank you, Vlad. I'm sorry to just cut you off there because I'm very conscious of the time. I would like to skip some slides and hop to the slide 7, where we show the different tools available. And then we can ask, because we're recommending the labor force survey, and we have the experience from South Africa to talk more in detail about that. But about the time use survey, can you skip to slide 7, please?
Okay.
So that we can on, and then we.
Okay.
So yeah, please go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so well, actually, I was intending to show this slide just as an image to show how the recommendation looks in the toolbox. But what basically happens is in the toolbox, as I said, it recommends labor force surveys or other large-scale surveys with the module attached to it as a preferred choice to measure volunteer work. However, there are other two alternatives because we understand that it may not always be possible to measure volunteer work according to the ILO recommendation. So in cases when it's not possible to use a labor force survey, the recommendation is to use a time use survey because sorry, Katrina, do you want me to explain in more details what are these time use surveys and what are the differences between?
No, I think for now, I think this is a very good overview of the different tools that are available. And I would now like to pass the mic to Ms. Tanya Cappadozzi, who can discuss more about what is the time use survey, what are the advantages, disadvantages of using such tools. And we've heard also, you've started a lot on the definitions of volunteer work. So I'm also very curious if there were challenges in terms of measuring volunteer work using this definition from you. So I'm handing over to you, Tanya. Italy has measured volunteer work 4 times over the last decade using time use survey, and Ms. Tanya Cappadozzi will be sharing with us their experience on the challenges and the advantages of using the survey, this type of data collection. Over to you, Tanya.
Hello. Good afternoon. I don't know if you can see the slides.
Yes, we can.
Okay, because I don't see it. I see you on my screen.
Okay.
Okay, I don't know. Okay, if you say that you can see the slide, I go on.
Yes, please.
Okay. Good afternoon to you, all of you. I'm Tania Cappadozzi from the Italian National Institute of Statistics. I am the officer responsible for the ILO module on volunteering and also for time use survey. In the last 10 years, my institute collected information on volunteering from different sources. In 2008 and in 2014 in time use survey, and in 2015 in a module on cultural and social participation attached to EU SILC. The main advantage of these two sources is that both are harmonized at EU level, so the data collected are completely comparable among European countries. But these surveys do not have a specific focus on volunteer work. So the information...
Excuse me, is that possible to make the slide to the whole screen, to be visible in the whole screen? Thank you.
Because I don't see the screen, so I
click
F5.
Click F5.
Yes.
F5.
I don't know if Katrina can make.
Can you click F5 on your keyboard?
Tania, prova, visualizza presentazione.
Sì, io... aspetta un attimo.
Sul tuo PowerPoint.
Sì, un attimo. I'm sorry.
Yes, no problem. So just while we're figuring out how to share the screen, I'd like to remind everyone to please post your questions on the chat box. After Tanya, we will hear the experience of South Africa in terms of measuring volunteer work using a different tool, the labor force survey. And then afterwards, we'll hear from Mr. Janis Janaki. And finally, we'll have some time for question and answers. Thank you. Go ahead, Tanya.
You now see the screen.
Katrina.
Now you see
Katrina.
the screen?
No, Tanya. Katrina,
No.
Prima, prova a lavorare sul tuo PowerPoint.
Io ho messo al massimo.
Um,
Metto presentazione, ma non mi va.
Okay, let me help you. I'm
Or
gonna.
Katrina may do it on visualizing options and can enter
Share screen.
in Tanya presentation.
Here you go. I'm sharing my screen now.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Yesterday we proved it's all okay. I don't know what happens today.
Yeah, now I also can view. Okay, now I'm also no, actually it's not yet sharing.
prova presentazione.
No, sorry. Sorry about this. This is not supposed to. Okay, I think we can go on while we figure out this technical issue. So I would just like to ask you, I'm sure you have everything on your head with this presentation, Tanya. So first of all, what we'd like to know is what were your experiences using the time use survey? Yeah. So
Okay.
we talked about, Vlad was talking about using the ILO manual on measurement on volunteer work. So I would like to get your 3 insights there exactly. So from measuring volunteer work over the past decade 4 times already, what were the 3 things that you could share with the audiences? And to everyone, we will share the presentation after this.
Okay. One problem for time use survey and also for EOSILC, and that these 2 sources are not a specific focus on the volunteer work. Using and so the information collected is scarce and presents some problems. And so in addition to these sources, Italy implemented the first time the ILO module on volunteer work, applying the ILO manual on measurement of volunteer work published in 2011. Okay. And in this first edition, we used this platform, the multi-purpose survey aspects of daily life. And I want to point out that the problem with time use survey and also with EOSILC is related to reference period, because in time use survey it's too small for time use, just 1 day, and too large for EOSILC, covering 12 months. In general, they do not refer to the definition of voluntary work presented in the resolution, excluding family members living outside the household. And so they include to family members do not live together. indirect volunteering. Therefore, the sites of phenomena detected through these sources are not comply with the request of the ILO definition. And so the first
Yes, so I think what will be also interesting for us to answer would be like after this, your past experiences in measuring volunteer work, you mentioned that you will be measuring another for the volunteer work next year as well. So
yeah.
what will be the changes or what types of innovation are you planning to introduce in this?
We compared to the experiment in our first edition, we have changed just some aspects. We use Time Use as platform to use both the diary and a questionnaire with the 4-week reference period. And but the general design remain unchanged, allowing comparison. We use the term volunteering in the question. We exclude non-cohabitant family members, and we use 3 type of question distinguish the organized volunteering, where we use directly the term volunteering, and 2 question on direct volunteering. And regard the 2 recommendation, we recommend to use the ISCO classification to coding volunteering activities, because this allows to analyze the interconnection between voluntary work and paid work, and also opening interesting line of studies. For example, the importance of skills acquired in volunteering to increase the employability of volunteers, especially young volunteers, and also question social aspects to enrich the analysis on volunteering. So you see here antecedent, social impact, motivation, and subject volunteer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tanya. I think we've heard a lot on Italy's experience. Again, we will share the presentation, but what Tanya was also saying is that for this next iteration of the measurement, you will focus more on the on trying to understand the social value of volunteer work. Now, I'd like to move to South Africa because they're using a different tool, and at the same time, I think they also already tried to measure the economic value of volunteer work. So let's hear from the chief statistician, labor statistician from South Africa Stats, Ms. Maleretwi Mosiane. Over to you. Maleretwi, I think you are muted.
Now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I'll go straight into the presentation. And in South Africa, we have the quarterly labor force survey, but this survey does not cover volunteer work. So we have a special survey, that is volunteer activities survey, that we have run for the past few years, since 2010. And the objective of this survey is to collect information about people who are involved in volunteer activities. And also we identify the organization-based and direct volunteering, as Flat had said, and also estimate the economic value of volunteering. So during the quarterly labor force survey data collection, we identify people who are involved in volunteer activities. And then we make a follow-up interview to get more details on the volunteer activities from those people who were involved in such activities. And we ask individuals to indicate all the volunteer activities that have been engaged in, but we collect detailed information only on the three main activities, the main being where they spend the most time. And we also collect some information in terms of the volunteer activities they were involved in the past year. So far, we have conducted 3 surveys in 2010, 2014, and 2018. And next year, we are going to have the next round of the volunteer activities survey. And some of the challenges that we have is that the data is collected by the field workers that are engaged in the quarterly labor force survey. So they are the same people who have to go back to collect volunteer activities module. So they might not identify all volunteers so that they reduce the workload for themselves. And also what we have noted is that when we are collecting information, most of the people don't regard the activities that they are engaged in as volunteering. So we have to do a lot of probing to actually get to the volunteering activities. And as such, these two challenges may underestimate the number of volunteers as well as the number of hours volunteered, and subsequently the value of volunteering, the economic value of volunteering. And we collect volunteer work information so that we have a comprehensive view of all forms of work that are undertaken in the South African economy. I won't go through the definition, Flat has already gone through this. What data items do we collect? We get information in terms of the types of activities that people are engaged in, the hours they volunteered, the type of work that they do in terms of occupation. Then we also get the industry in which they volunteer in. These are just some of the indicators that we publish, or we compute and then publish: number of volunteers, volunteer rate, hours volunteered, as well as the value of volunteering. And now in terms of getting to the value of volunteering, there are 2 general approaches that are recommended. That is opportunity cost method, as well as replacement cost method. And in South Africa, we have adapted the replacement method. I won't go through the definitions that are in my presentation, which you can have at a later time. And how do we go about now assigning the economic value to the volunteer work? We look at the median hourly earnings that are worked by these volunteers in the occupation in the particular occupation. Then the median hourly earnings are then multiplied by the total hours that they have volunteered to get the total hours worked for that reference period, and then we convert that value to an annual figure that we now publish. Just to give you a few indicators that we publish using the latest survey that we ran in 2018. In terms of the number of volunteers, we had about 2.7 million people volunteering, and most of them were women who accounted for 61.9% of all volunteers. And the volunteer rate, as you can see, was higher among women than among men. And of course, subsequently, the hours and the value of volunteering is higher among women. So those are the figures that we have. And we publish the reports via media briefings, and we also make the reports available on the website, as well as distribute them to the libraries across the country. And also the microdata is available on the website for free.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much, Ms. Malaretti, for that very quick Okay, I can't hear everyone. So yes, so now we've heard from statisticians, and we've talked about the different tools and methods for measuring volunteer work, the experiences they had, and what are some future innovations as well. We can probe Ms. Valoretti on that again, on her ideas on how could we better improve data collection, and how can we systematically measure volunteer work. So actually this question may be our next speaker, who is the Presidential Commissioner for Volunteering from Cyprus, could help us answer, because as Vlad actually was mentioning earlier as well, the statisticians, the national statisticians, they would just do what other ministries would tell them, or what numbers the other ministries would like them to crunch for them. So now, hearing from perspective from another government ministry, let's try to call on Mr. Yanis Ijanaki. Can you tell us, from your perspective, how can we support the statisticians to improve data collection, to systematically measure volunteer work, and what are some of the ways forward as well that you can see? How can we use these numbers as well? Because measurement is just one part of it. How can we use this to improve volunteering practice in general? So over to you, Mr. Yanis Janaki.
Thank you for the opportunity. It is important to say, though, that to implement policies or improve policies, you need surveys and statistical information. So it is important to have this kind of approaches and information. Saying that, of course, to have this enable environment to measure volunteerism, you need specific policies that they will create this positive environment, so we can see the impact of volunteers, not only in numbers, but also in quality-wise. Cyprus, of course, as you know, it is a very unique country. We have created this political position for 8 years ago, almost, because we felt that we need to give a political emphasis to the sector. We do have also a very active participation at the European level, mainly because we are a good practice as a country for that. And of course, it is important to understand, to have a clear meanings, because sometimes the meanings are kind of not clear. For us, volunteerism, it is unpaid work. It is at their own free will. It is activism. So it is important to clear this out. And to distinguish between volunteerism and charity work. It is important to say that during the crisis, especially the pandemic, we see that our policies we planned a few years ago, they were very useful. For example, we do have a specific protocol to manage volunteers in the time of crisis. We do have the infrastructures for that. We have a Pan-Cypriot Coordination Humanitarian Center. We have the House of Volunteers that we utilize them in a time of crisis. And of course, it's important to understand that now in all our governmental emergency plans, either that is fire, forest, or earthquakes, and so on, we are in the plans of the government as volunteer center. It is important to say that, first of all, we provide insurance for all the volunteers we are activating. We do have specific protocols of how they can be active for each specific crisis. We do provide training, because it's important to provide them training. And of course, where is needed, we provide them equipment for that. Let me give you an example for the pandemic in Cyprus. During the pandemic, especially the lockdown, the completely lockdown for 2 months, we have a big number of volunteer activities that is sum up to more than 8,000 activities for volunteer work all over Cyprus, for people in need, people that were in quarantine in hotels, special medication deliveries, volunteers that staff call centers and so on. Of course, in Cyprus, we had a big humanitarian activity to support, for example, the people in Lebanon after the big blast in August. We activate our centers all over Cyprus. We have hundreds of volunteers supporting the whole process. In the end of the day, we sent 300 tons of food to the people there. Of course, as I said before, we had our first survey, because it's important to have the numbers, in 2015. That was about over 4,000 households and over of now 9,000 people. And what came out of this survey, it was 9.8% of the people participate in volunteer work. And of course, always women are more in numbers than men. We had 55% more women than men. Then we had our second survey in 2017. Again, about the same numbers of over 9,000 people participate in the survey. And here we see 12.4% people that they had volunteer work. 43% they are in the ages of younger, between 16 and 39. And of course, this survey also conducted and divided the participation of volunteers in organization or participation of volunteers with their own initiatives. So it was very important survey. Additional to that, we have some unique and innovative ideas to encourage participation of young people and NGOs. We have this public consultation of the President of the Republic with open agenda with NGOs, which also is very unique. And the most unique and innovative idea is the informal ministerial meeting, meaning that the President and the ministers of the Republic of Cyprus come together and in front of about 700 people each time, mainly young people from high school, universities, and so on, watch how the Council of Ministers take their decision. And of course, they have the opportunity to ask questions and suggestions for the matters that they are interested to them. As you see, it is very innovative and very interesting. Of course, another target group, it is schools. Schools is a good way to measure between young people the impact of volunteerism, and in numbers and in quality. We have the two programs actually in schools. One is a guide that we have designed especially to encourage activities for teachers and students in schools for volunteerism. And of course, from September of this year, we will implement a new program for the 17 SDGs with a guide for each SDG that will encourage school and students to use these SDGs to empower volunteer work in schools. It is important to say, of course, that we have cooperation with universities, and of course we need, as I said before, tools that will support us for that. The Council of Ministers approved the Declaration of the Rights and Responsibilities of Volunteers. It is important that how NGOs use volunteers. It is important how we guide the volunteers. We have the policy making paper for that we empower civil society in general, and of course the active citizenship charter that they are, as I said before, 3 political papers that support our policies. We have infrastructures that give us opportunity to run activities at the voluntary level. And of course, you have awards that also is a very good idea, way of measure volunteers, that we divide them in different levels, working volunteers, individual volunteers, volunteers in school and universities, and so on. It is a very good way to, as I said before, to measure volunteers. We inform that the benefits is not only for the society and the country. There is some personal also positive gains because a volunteer can acquire knowledge and skills outside of the official education system. It creates a a way of making new friends, the active participation. It is important prevention tools, strengthens the value of society, and of course there is the financial input of the third sector, as we call it, to the gross domestic product of each country. It depends on the level of volunteerism. Of course, we have legislations that we very keen, especially targeting financial transparency and good governance. Important tool for us that we are in the process of doing it, it is the recognition of non-informal, informal learning and also volunteerism, because it is also a good way to measure volunteerism. The recognition of skills and knowledges is very important for us. And of course, today, this morning at the Presidential Palace, I announced the public consultation for the national strategy for active citizenship and volunteerism in Cyprus that will be presented in the Council of Ministers in September. And also, it's going to be like a stock taking of what we've done up to now, but also future steps for volunteerism 21-23, which is for us, it is a very important policy. And of course, as we talk now, it's ongoing our third survey for the levels of volunteers in Cyprus for 2019. Of course, we have other tools, electronic tools, and so on. The 17 SDGs platform that will create soon, that will be mapping all the activities in Cyprus for the SDGs, and in addition to volunteerism. And of course, we have close cooperation with the private sector, because the social responsibility in volunteerism, it is an important also tool for measuring volunteerism. That's it from me, as fast as possible, but I'm sure that the question and the discussion is going to be even more important.
Yes, thank you so much, Yanis. That was a very quick presentation, but with lots of substance into it. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us here would love to move to Cyprus after hearing all the support that volunteers are getting there in terms of measurement of volunteer work, but the recognition as well. And you were mentioning earlier in the Presidential Palace, you had this important ceremony. I have a lot of questions from our participants here, but we don't have much time, so I would just ask people if it's still possible to stay about 5 to 10 minutes more, so that we could have a bit of a discussion, and for sure we can continue this in other channels as well. So without further ado, as the Commissioner says, because I have you here, volunteers play an important role in emergencies, especially during COVID. Have we seen more or less measurement of volunteer work during the pandemic? How can we measure when surveys and field work are suspended? So the second question I would leave to the two statisticians that we have there, Vlad and Tanya. And for Ms. Maloreto, I have a question for you directly to South Africa from Ms. Perdita Windgenter from Germany. So she's asking, did your calculation of the value of volunteering include the gender pay gap? So yes, so over to whoever, Ms. Maloretti, would you like to first answer that question?
Yes, I can answer. We didn't really compute the gender pay gap in our publication, but the data is available and that can be done. Thank you.
Okay. And on the question, like, have we seen more or less measurement of volunteer work during the pandemic? Anyone would like to share the experience here?
Well, for us in Cyprus, because we did count also the number of volunteers and the activities they did, we've seen, yes, actually it was impressive. First of all, the big number of volunteers, they were young people. So we have the younger age that was involved, even though it was difficult. We've seen a quality approach from the volunteers, it was the first time we see this kind of approach. And of course, yes, we counted, as you see in my slide presentation, the numbers of activities for each sector and the number of volunteers we use for the pandemic. So even though it was difficult, we've seen actually volunteers can be also in difficult situations and used.
Thank you. So I'd like to pass to Vlad or Tanya.
Yeah, Katrina.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd like to answer the question on how to measure volunteering during the lockdowns, right?
Yes.
So this year, last year in March, April, right after the this establishment of total or partial lockdowns in different countries, our department conducted a survey of national statistical offices, trying to understand what happened to data collection. So those countries who had in place some systems to interview respondents remotely through internet or using phones, they continue data collection, at least partially. And some countries still conducted direct interviews, visiting households with specific measures. But there is a number of countries like Russia, Kazakhstan, Colombia, Mexico, which are measuring volunteer work according to the ILO recommendations every quarter. So they were able to measure participation in volunteer work of their population during this time, well, with some difficulties early last year. And what I can say from the data I saw and data published by these institutions is that there is a shift from organization-based to direct volunteering, because people had less opportunities to go out to activities organized by different types of organizations. And it's difficult to say whether it increased or decreased, because some measures prevented people to volunteer, but in the same time, these measures created opportunities for volunteering within communities. But what's important I would like to highlight is that by following the ILO recommendations, these countries were able to still collect data on volunteering during the pandemic.
Thank you. And to Tanya, would you like to add some more? We have heard so many questions here, actually a lot on the measuring social impacts of volunteering, but also around COVID.
In our next edition, we have had two questions on the changes that the pandemic could have on the voluntary activities, but for now we have we have no results. Just to question, because we think that many people could change the type of activity from organized activity to direct activity, helping the neighbor, the network that they can have very near to home. And so we try to understand this with the data, but we have not yet results.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I mean, I'm sure it's really very challenging now with all the other factors to consider with COVID as well. And then also the different types of disaggregations that we also need to keep in mind now. So we are coming to the end of this webinar. If anyone else have a burning question, please go ahead. You don't need to type it. You could also just speak now. But in terms of like looking at the impact, the social and economic impact of volunteering, this is a very, very interesting topic. And we have UNV last year has done an Innovation Challenge Fund where we looked at different models on how we can measure volunteer, not just the number of hours spent volunteering, but actually what is the impact at the individual level, societal level, at the global level. So that's something that you should stay tuned, and this will be for the next webinar. So for now, unless anyone else, also I would like to ask the panelists once again if they would like to say final remarks. Or anyone else?
Katrina?
Yes, please.
Katrina?
Yes.
Yes,
Go ahead.
because I saw a couple of questions in the chat, so I would like to answer.
Go
So
ahead.
one is from Mark Liberati.
Mhm.
It's a question on the criterion of 1/3 of the local wages. That is a criterion used to exclude from volunteer work those people who receive some cash support, which is higher than 1/3 of the local wages. So the intention of this criteria is to exclude from volunteering those people, what the situation which we call as disguised employment, because there may be sometimes even some schemes promoted by the governments to employ people, especially young people, in some occupations, activities, which people, well, few people would accept. And they promote this as a way to increase employability among young people. And this may look like volunteering. In some countries, they even may call themselves volunteers, but this is a scheme to promote employment. So to exclude those cases, we have this criteria. Although using this criteria, implementing this criterion in practice is very challenging, because people don't like to speak about the cash they receive. And in our test, we discovered that people even consider this offensive, and they don't want to answer this question. So in most cases, statisticians will not have enough information to use this criteria and exclude someone from volunteer work. And very few people actually say that they receive some cash, big cash amounts. And another question is from Neil Nemisoglu. It refers to how we judge if the engagement in volunteer work is on a free will basis. So the ILO module and our guidance, we propose a question on the motivation to do volunteer work. And there are a couple of options that could indicate that the engagement is not voluntary, that people do this type of work because they are coerced somehow, or this is actually an obligation, not a free choice. And in our test in Ukraine and Senegal, we are able to capture this type of cases.
Thank you.
That's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Vlad. I think you spend a lot of time talking about the definition of volunteer work, but actually there's still a lot of unclarities around it. So, but I think it's good that you are clarifying these questions.
Well, many things are not clear even for me. So thank you for asking those questions, because it helps me clarify many things.
Yeah.
Excuse me, can I have a quick question to Vladimir Ganta?
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. Just I'm Ondral from Mongolia, representing the network of Mongolian volunteer organizations. Is the by the ILO, how is the volunteer work is considered as a labor or not?
Well, in the ILO, we have, according to the latest standards, we have one concept of work, which is production of goods and services. Then we have different forms of work. And employment is work for an income, for a salary, a wage, a profit. And we have unpaid work. And volunteering is a form of unpaid work, because the motivation is not to earn something, but to give something. Yes.
Thank you.
And the word labor is used for labor force which comprises employed and unemployed.
Okay. And where can I see the link or see that kind of resource material to that?
Yes, I will put in the chat the link to the latest resolution of Conference of Labor Statisticians, and you can access that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Vladimir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Andrew, would you like to? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I'm Andrew K. Wedgler. I'm a Liberian presently studying in China. And speaking of measuring volunteerism, I'm a little concerned. There are sometimes you volunteer to do something and the amount of impact that is expected, sometimes you don't reach that goal. But yet you spend more time carry on this project. I want to know, when measuring the stats in volunteerism, or which is more important? Is it the amount of impact your service makes on society or whatever group you are volunteering for, or the amount of time you spend volunteering?
Thank you for that question. Who would like to answer that? And then I think that's the last question, and we would wrap up. Ms. Maloreto, would you like to take that? I think your question was around what is more important, the time spent volunteering or my impact, right?
I can say if
Sorry, let's start with Ms. Maloreto, and then I'll hand it over to you, Mr. Janice.
No, I was saying what is important for me is the amount of time that people spend volunteering. Then we can just attach a value to see how much contribution those volunteers are making to the economy. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Yes, thank you. And Mr. Janice? So that was from a statistician's point of view.
First of all, it is important that to do your volunteer work. The impact sometimes it doesn't depends only on the volunteers. It depends on the environment. It depends on the support that the volunteer has. So the most important thing for me, and a volunteer should not be disappointed on the result, because most of the time it doesn't depend to the volunteer, the result. So it is the most important thing for me. It is the volunteer work. Of course, in the next step, it will count also the impact, but the most important thing, it is the volunteer work.
Yes, so thank you. Again, I'm sorry that we extended this first online dialogue, but we would like to continue talking to you and looking at the different ways as well, because now we only covered one thing, which is on statistics, on like how many people volunteer, the time spent volunteering, how can we measure this? But a lot of your questions were actually looking at, okay, now we measure, we know who volunteers and how many are they, but what is their impact? So that will be the more exciting conversation, which we will have in the next iterations of this webinar. So we will be sharing with you a lot of our resources on the UNV Knowledge Portal, knowledge.unv.org, and all the presentations. And also we will open a discussion forum so we could keep discussing this. So thank you and have a good day to everyone. And we apologize for all the technical issues that we have. And I would like to express again sincere thanks to our very busy and highly distinguished panel, Mr. Yanis Janaki, Ms. Tanya Capadozzi from Italy, Mr. Maloretti, Musiana from South Africa Stats, and of course to Vlad Ganta from ILO. So thank you and have a great day.
Thank you very much.